Hello everyone, Hyper here, and welcome to the Fury Warrior discussion. Now rather than a review, this will be a discussion video because Fury Warrior hasn't seen too many changes, and the ones that it has seen aren't really significant. And I tried testing it, I did some dummy testing, a little bit of a dungeon testing, and this spec does not work currently on the beta. So there's a lot of issues with it, as you will see when I go through these talking points. But overall, I would rather give my opinion on what should be changed than review a spec that is basically not functioning currently. First of all, we saw that Shockwave was removed from the talents, just like for arms, and it was replaced with Impending Victory. That's not a massive change because they're trying to move away from having AoE stun on every class. As for changes, we saw that Enrage was changed from 100% attack speed to 50%. But the duration was increased by 2 seconds. Commanding Shout was renamed to Rallying Cry. Battle Cry was renamed to Recklessness, so those are just cosmetic or aesthetic, I guess, class fantasy changes. Recklessness was buffed by 1% to compensate for the GCD change, I assume. Bloodbath cooldown was changed from 30 seconds to 40 seconds. Inner Rage was changed from 150 to 100%, so that's a slight nerf on it. And then Wrecking Ball was buffed from 250% to 300. And with the removal of Shockwave, our only new talent is Impending Victory. So now let's have a discussion about what should be changed about the Fury Warrior going into BFA. And we'll take a look at the talents first because I think this is where a majority of the issues come from. The talent rows are not designed very well, and a lot of the talents are currently dead. And we'll see that instantly in the first row. So War Machine, I think, is a decent talent for AoE situations where you're able to kill ads, and then you have a primary target that you want to DPS to. This is still going to most likely be the go-to talent for like Mythic Plus, and anywhere where you can proc this talent. Then we have Endless Rage, which just gives us extra rage gen on auto attacks. And then we have Fresh Meat. So this talent needs to be removed. It's essentially a very bad Synodaria's legendary, which no one used in Legion, and this should be replaced with a talent that either gives us a burst of attack speed after we rampage, or some other rage regeneration talent. Another thing about this row is that we have War Machine, a haste talent competing with rage regen talent, and then a damage talent. That's not a well-designed row. War Machine should be competing with Frenzy, because they essentially do the same thing in different styles. You get bursts of haste from War Machine, and then you get steady haste from Frenzy. So obviously the amount of haste you get from Frenzy should be lower because you're able to keep it up 100% of the time, but it should compete with War Machine. And more haste also means more haste regen, or I mean rage gen for us. So that would kind of make sense to compete with Endless Rage. So that means I wouldn't even mind just dropping Fresh Meat and just moving Frenzy to this row. The second row is basically fine. It's just a utility / self-healing row. Not much to comment here. Tier 3 should be made an AoE row, and I'd like to see quite a few changes made to this row. First of all, Wrecking Ball is a good talent in my opinion. You get the sustained AoE damage from it, right? The numbers need to be tuned on Whirlwind, but overall this is a good talent. But then we have it competing with 2 damage cooldown talents, because Outburst essentially takes a utility cooldown and makes it into a damage cooldown. So I would like to see Bladestorm being swapped into this row and replaced with Avatar, so Avatar moved down to the last row. And essentially that would make us having to choose between steady AoE or burst AoE. And then Outburst should just be completely removed and replaced with Odin's Fury. So with Odin's Fury we would have an in-between between Wrecking Ball and Bladestorm, where we have a sustained AoE talent, kind of a in-between hybrid talent on a shorter cooldown, and then a longer cooldown strong burst AoE talent. So that would really give us some options when it comes to AoE, rather than making us choose between talents that in theory shouldn't even be competing with each other. In Tier 4, this is another utility row, and honestly, I don't have too much input into this one, but one thing that I would like to mention is that Fury Warriors don't really need more self-healing, especially in raiding. We need more solid defensives. So we're able to heal back the damage that we take as long as it doesn't one-shot us. And that is the biggest problem Fury Warrior has when it comes to survival. So I suggest that you implement something along the lines of defensive stance or something similar that fits the Fury gameplay and the Fury style more. Then in tier 5, again, there should be quite a few changes here. Frothing Berserker is a good talent because it causes us to alternate between a building stage with low damage and a spending high damage phase. So that is kind of interesting in my opinion. One thing I would like to note that is a little awkward to capped rage to get the Frothing Berserker buff. So if the talent was changed to maybe give us the damage bonus at 85 rage, it would feel a little smoother to play. And even if they tone down the overall damage increase from 15% to a number that they see fit, but it would make it so we don't have to overcap rage to get the damage bonus. Massacre should be removed and completely replaced with Sense Death, which is a Legion artifact trait, essentially allowing us to chain together more executes. And if it competes with Frothing, then we don't have to wait to hit 100 rage every time before we execute, which feels a little awkward to do. Then Carnage is pretty much useless right now and should be replaced with Odin's Champion. And this was again a trait in Legion. So I'm just going off of the fact that they want a trait or a talent that is revolving around Rampage. So this talent, what it does is it gives us CDR after we Rampage. So it speeds up our rotation passively, which is overall quite a nice playstyle in my opinion. Then in tier 6, like I mentioned before, Frenzy should be moved from this tier to compete with War Machine. Possible replacement for Frenzy in this row would be Juggernaut, allowing Fury Warriors to either go like a steady damage or an execute build. So you kind of have to make the choice because currently Fury Warrior doesn't really feel like an execute class, and that was its big theme in Legion. Fury Warrior with Juggernaut was that huge execute. The longer you were in execute, the more insane damage you were doing. Inner Rage is a really solid talent, and without it, Fury feels extremely awkward to play. So the other two talents in this row need to be extremely good for us to even consider them because of how good Inner Rage is, even after it's been toned down quite a bit when it comes to numbers. Bloodbath is still decent, and it's probably going to still see use in PvP, where we want burst windows rather than steady damage. The numbers on it just needs to be tweaked a little bit, because currently they're just not there. You press Bloodbath and you're still essentially doing 0 damage. Tier 7, last row. Ditch Reckless Abandon. I don't like this talent overall, its design, it just feels very clunky. And replace it with a CDR talent, allowing us to Recklessness more often. So Convergence of Fate became kind of iconic in Legion, on Fury Warriors especially. And if they replace it with kind of a more less RNG talent that kind of resembles Convergence of Fate, I feel like that would fit into this talent row quite well. Dragon Roar, again, kind of bad talent. I don't see how this even fits. So it does, first of all, it does no damage, and its only use, one and only use, is the 15% damage increase. There are better ways of implementing another cooldown than Dragon Roar. Fury already struggles with having too many cooldowns to press before damaging. So this talent should be a talent that empowers our burst window. So I'm talking Avatar. I already said that Avatar should be moved from that row and changed with Bladestorm. So moving Avatar down to this row would make it feel a little nicer. And even if Avatar was changed to just empower our Recklessness rather than just being a second cooldown, that would also make some sense because of the GCD changes that we are seeing. And like I mentioned, if Bladestorm was to be moved, we would have another open slot. And for this, I would suggest an AoE ability enhancer. So either something that buffs our Bloodthirst or something else that buffs our AoE cooldowns. And this would open up 3 builds for Fury. We would have a single target steady build, a single target execute build, and then some form of an AoE build. So that would open up a lot of possibilities. Now I realize that our rage generation is still going to be a little low because none of the talents I mentioned really give us any rage gen. So there's potential in the first row to make it a purely rage gen row rather than making it kind of like a haste row. But there are quite a few ways of Blizzard can go about this to make Fury Warrior rage generation feel a little bit nicer. Currently, it's not too bad as it stands because Fury Warrior's biggest issue mostly comes from the amount of damage it does with its abilities and the talents that it has. Now that we talked about the talents, let's take a look at what other changes should be made to the Fury Warrior to make it more playable. First of all, Recklessness should most definitely be off the GCD. Having a 6-second offensive cooldown on the GCD is ridiculous. Like, you press it and then you're already down to 5 seconds before you can press another ability. And that is assuming you have a 1-second GCD, which we do not. As I'm playing right now, so at 110 with 14% haste, I have a 1.3 second GCD. So even that, you would need to get your haste to ridiculous amounts to get a 1-second GCD. So I think this should just be off the GCD and you're able to pop it with other abilities. We probably all saw the gif of the person pressing Avatar, Recklessness, Dragon Roar, and then something else. Having to spend 3 GCDs before you're even able to do anything else is kind of ridiculous. Another thing that Fury Warrior struggles with, like I mentioned before, is our survivability for large bursts of damage. Now, this is not that big of an issue in PvP, because in PvP, your health kind of gets chunked, so you're able to frenzy regen and then kind of sustain yourself with Bloodthirst. But in raiding, especially in Mythic raiding, very often we see very large hits, which either one-shot you without a cooldown or get you very close to being one-shot. And as a Fury Warrior, we know that most players have a Cancel Aura macro for their Enrage. Because if you have Enrage up on top of that damage that you're going to take, that will most likely kill you if you're a Fury Warrior. So you have to cancel your Enrage, and then you just kind of have to pray that you're able to survive that hit. Now, we do have Rallying Cry, but as raiders, that is most likely going to be used as a raid cooldown rather than something that you use to save yourself. So I'd like to see something along the lines of defensive stance implemented to Fury Warriors, or even something on like a 1-minute cooldown that gives us like 10-20% damage reduction, anything to make us able to survive large hits. And then another big issue is Fury Warrior's damage. And I mentioned this in my tweet, I mentioned this on stream, I mentioned this to basically anyone I talked to about Fury Warrior. Currently, we need a damage buff across the board. All of our abilities need to be buffed, and our auto attack damage needs to be nerfed. As it stands right now, I will show you on a target dummy here. Most of our damage comes from auto attacks. This means that if half your damage is coming from auto attacks, it doesn't really matter how well you min-max the rest of your abilities, because even if you do it absolutely perfectly, the damage gain from you playing perfect versus you playing just, blindly pressing all of your buttons is not that big of a difference, because your auto attack is doing half of your damage. And that should not be the case for any melee class. I understand that they're trying to buff back auto attacks, and auto attacks should feel like strong and important to keep high uptime on the boss, but it is absolutely preposterous to assume or to think that any class could be functional if melee attacks are half their damage. That is just ridiculous to think. Even a 4-target AoE, so I did AoE testing on the 4-target dummies in the new city, and after an extended duration, auto attacks became our top damage on that as well. And by extended duration, I don't mean like 5 minutes. I mean like after 30 to 40 seconds, where you're constantly whirlwinding, bloodthirsting, and then getting those whirlwind empowered rampages in. With Blade Storm, it doesn't matter. Auto attacks are still doing your top damage on 4 targets. And I assume even on 5 targets because of how big of the margin was on the damage difference. So that is completely ridiculous. Fury Warrior just needs an overall buff to all of its abilities. Every single one should be buffed. Now, one thing that is nice about Fury Warrior after all this negativity is that going with this build that I have up on the screen, Fury Warrior feels pretty smooth to play. Outside of Dragon Roar, everything kind of flows nice together. Again, if Rec was off the GCD, again, would make it better. But you kind of have this building phase, spending phase, burst phase versus low damage phase, and it feels very smooth to play. And if the damage was there, it would be very rewarding to play as well. You're not spending large amounts of downtime. You're basically pressing a button on every single global cooldown, which is what you want to see out of a class. I'm not a Fury Warrior main, and these ideas are purely based on intuition and experience from playing other melee classes for years, and knowing kind of how a class is supposed to play, and by taking a look at the talents, I kind of get a feel of how they want it to play. But currently, the idea of how it should play and the reality of how it plays do not match up at all. I'm very curious to hear your opinion about how this class should be played and what the changes to it should be, especially if you played this class and this spec in previous expansions or even in current expansions and you're maining it or you're playing it as an alt. But if you have some experience with it and have gotten a chance to try it on the BFA beta, even if you didn't, just please tell me what you think about it, how it should be changed, and let's have a discussion about what should be done to make the Fury Warrior feel good to play in the next expansion. Because, like I saw from the comments in my Arms Warrior video, a lot of people really like playing Fury, and this is one of those specs that a lot of people have either played in the past or have mained at some point. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and sub to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.